Hello and welcome to Sports Amazons podcast, on which we celebrate women adventurers around the world. And my guest today is Cathy O'Dowd, the South African rock climber, mountaineer, author and motivational speaker. She began climbing while in university and at 21 took part in her first mountain expedition to the Ruwenzori in Central Africa. The first woman to reach the summit of Mount Everest from both north and south sides, Cathy was a member of the first South African Everest expedition, which reached the summit in 1996, following the route used by Edmund Hillary. In 2000, she became the fourth woman to climb Lhotse, the world's fourth highest mountain. Cathy has climbed mountains across southern and central Africa and South America. She's married to the first South African Everest expedition leader, Ian Woodall. Hi Cathy, welcome to the programme.
I'm delighted to be joining you.
Well, tell us where you are right now, Cathy.
I'm sitting in a hotel on the banks of Lake Geneva, but at the other end, at a beautiful Swiss town called Montreux, which has got these wonderful Victorian hotels that sit along the banks of the lake, and then you look across onto the Alps. And I mean, it's glorious in the very best Swiss mountain fashion.
It certainly is, isn't it? And the chocolates to go with it. Of course, Montreux is known for its musical festival, isn't it? Jazz festival.
Yeah. Yes, it is. I think that's a summer affair, and it's beautiful in summer. But this is winter. The mountains are all coated in snow. I'm here to give a talk for a corporate client, and I've got to cross the pass back to Chamonix in France tomorrow in the middle of a snowstorm. But hopefully the snowstorm means half a metre of powder, which I can then ski on the weekend.
Well, I knew that, you're not going to just sit there in your hotel and look at those mountains, being the adventurer you are. But you mentioned that you're there in Geneva to give a motivational presentation. I'm curious as to which way round you place your life in order now, because there was a time you would put yourself, I'm sure, first as an adventurer. The roles seem to have been switched somewhat, but I'm sure you have goals on those mountains still. How do you spend most of your time these days?
Probably half-half. So about half the time is around my speaking business. It is a business. I essentially pay my mortgage off speaking fees. And the other half of the time is in the mountains. Mountains are such a metaphor for getting to the top of things, obviously. And it comes with all this loaded language about conquering and achieving and goals and stuff. So people assume it has to be a very goal-driven activity, and it may be for some climbers. But I'm all about the journey, just being in those environments. So yes, it's fascinating to be on big expeditions, but big expeditions can be a pain in the butt. They're expensive and time consuming and remote and just, they can be frustrating to organize and execute. But just being in the mountains daily, whether it's rock climbing or up there on skis or running, that I like. So the idea is to craft a life where I can spend a good half of my life just in mountains one way or another.
It sounds as if you've arrived at where you would want to be in your life by that 50-50 split, making a living but enjoying the mountains as and when you feel the draw. And I'm curious about your current plans for any climbing, any expeditions. And what's on your bucket list, Cathy? Because I'm sure there's more mountains to climb.
Oh, there's always more mountains to climb. A lifetime is not nearly long enough. Well, again, it's a balance between being practical and continuing to pursue different things that interest me. So 2016 was a year of a couple of big trips. Spring was an expedition to Mount Logan, second highest mountain in North America, highest in Canada. So it's nearly 20,000 feet high, and that was a ski trip. So we climbed the thing on skis and then skied off from the top. And then summer was spent rock climbing. So this is technical rock climbing in the US, in Idaho and Wyoming, mostly doing big multi-pitch routes in places like the Grand Tetons. Wonderful year. I love 2016, but it was expensive. you know, I spent more than I made, and I can't keep doing that on an indefinite basis. So 2017 is going to be a year that's closer to home. I live in Europe. I am South African, but I actually live in the Pyrenees Mountains in a postage stamp-sized country called Andorra, between Spain and France, right in the mountains. And there's so much to do in Europe. At the moment, I've relocated to a friend's flat in Chamonix. Chamonix is the mountain town of Europe. It's right at the foot of Mont Blanc, highest mountain in Western Europe, and it is just awash with climbers, adventurers, travelers, skiers passing through. It's iconic in Europe. And I'm going to be spending the winter in Chamonix. So the thing is, they don't have to be big to be interesting and exciting. 2017 is going to be about Europe, about the enormous number of adventures that can be had in my sort of continental-sized backyard.
What would you say the next really on your to-do list of what you really want to do before you hang up your boots, Cathy?
Oh, no, there's no hanging up of boots. There's just, maybe being a little bit slower in the boots.
Okay.
But yes, fair enough. The next a big objective, something I've always wanted to do, is a mountain that's never been climbed before. And what really interests me is not, so much the concept of conquering a virgin summit or some such thing. It's the process. Because people don't realize that there are thousands of mountains in the world that have never been climbed. But none of them are terribly easily accessible. There's a reason why they aren't climbed. They tend to be in Western China or in the various Stan countries, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, or on the border between India and China, which of course is a highly militarized border. So there's the challenge of finding the right area, then finding within that area, finding the mountain. And modern technology has changed that game completely. It's amazing what you can do with Google Earth and some maps in terms of looking virtually at mountains. And then you've got to get permission to get into that area. And then having done all of this theoretical planning, it's finally boots on the ground, walk up the valley and see whether the mountain that exists bears any resemblance to what you thought you were getting when you were doing your planning. But then presented with a mountain, this isn't, Everest 2017, where you're just going to clip into a fixed line at base camp and join a queue. Every step of the mountain has already been covered with, live video. This is looking at a mountain and going where do we start? Literally, which side do we start on? All of that I find fascinating. So that's my next big bucket list, is an unclimbed mountain.
Well, that leads me very nicely to your point about the planning there, Cathy, because, what you did with Everest, climbing it each and every way in some shape or form, and those other big mountains would have involved a tremendous amount of planning. Now, things I'm sure have evolved. They're somewhat easier, as you say, not least of all because we have the internet and Google Earth. But in terms of setting off, say, on a mountain that has never been climbed before, how long a preparation would that involve, and what kind of team would you need to achieve that?
It's difficult to put a length of time on the preparation because actually the way these projects work is somebody, it may be myself, I may be invited to join somebody else, but somebody has been sitting on an idea. And they've been doing a little bit of inquiring here and there and looking at some photographs and talking to people and maybe seeing if they could get a permit. But it's sort of unrealized potential. And then something will happen that makes that project suddenly feel like it can be realized. You'll come across a sponsor who's interested in supporting that kind of project. You'll meet another climber who just shares a passion and you go right, let's make it happen. So it's very seldom day one of planning starts now and a year from now we're ready to go. It will be percolating in the back of your mind until its moment comes. And when its moment comes, the project may end up being put together really quite quickly. Probably the hardest expedition I've been on was being a member of the team that did the first ascent of Nanga Parbat via the Mazeno Ridge. Nanga Parbat, 9th highest mountain in the world in Pakistan. Mazeno Ridge had been tried by 10 teams over 35 years. No one had succeeded. And there I was invited in January, and we were off on the mountain by the end of May. But that idea had been percolating in the mind of Sandy Allen, the leader, for years. And somehow its moment came. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
But it's a fascinating answer, because I'm sure these ideas, as you say, have been percolating in someone's mind that, one day we would love to do this. But I can imagine, as an adventurer, the unknown aspect is as much of the fun and the challenge as what is structured in that expedition from start to finish.
Exactly. And the idea, you've got to have it more than just a sort of wishful thinking. I'm not much of a believer in if you can dream it, you can do it. You're going to actually have to do something to make it happen. The idea is that you're collecting information, planning, ideas about permits, the right mountain, whatever it is, contacts with other people. But you kind of need the stars to align. You need to find the right season of the year, which you have free. You've got to have logistical permission from the countries involved. You've got to have the right team of people, and you've got to have the money. And sometimes if you suddenly realize that those stars are beginning to come together, this is the time where the project needs to be kicked into high gear. But you'll only be ready to seize that moment if you've got all the planning kind of in process. So I tend to have a couple of projects sort of percolating, waiting for their moment.
Which aspects of this do you most enjoy then? Is it in identifying that mountain and figuring out how you're going to conquer it, and the whole process and the teamwork that is involved and all the rest of it? Is that what gets you out of bed each day?
I think the things I like most about all of it, actually, is the discovery process. I think I'm fundamentally driven as a climber or a lover of mountain sports by curiosity. What would it be like to do that? And am I capable of doing that? And an unclimbed mountain sort of ups the level of curiosity enormously, because there's so little you know compared to going onto a well-trodden route on a well-known mountain. So the unclimbed mountain has the curiosity factor at a very high level. The things I don't like are the things that involve trying to raise money to pay for these things, dealing with media, trying to sell the project. All of that I find dispiriting. And where I can, I actually try and do expeditions that I can effectively pay for myself, or where we can get grants. So and still expeditions with fairly low budgets, and personal money plus grant money will be enough to fund it. People assume that the likes of the big corporate sponsorship, Everest, rah-rah razzmatazz expeditions with big media coverage are somehow the best thing, the pinnacle thing. They're not. They're mostly just exhausting. And they end up feeling like this drudgery of a business plan rather than the joy of a mountain journey.
That seems to be a lot more sort of commercial, if you will, the sort of thing that tourists can readily do these days. I mean, if I wanted to go and climb Everest, there's a way of doing it without being an experienced adventurer and climber as you are. And on the point of experience, as they say, is something you have just after you need it. And with that, over the years, you've gained tremendous experience. And I'm wondering what it's like for people coming into this sport, this activity now. What have you seen change for women? I'm curious about that, and the accessibility, not just to the opportunities, but also the funding process, as you say, and the media. They have to educate them in so many different ways, as well as gaining the experience ready to achieve the next climb.
Oh, a great deal has changed in ways that are really interesting. And although probably overall it's easier, there are some new obstacles that, seem to me to be tough. I think when I first started I mean, I first rock climbed at 14. I got sent off on a summer camp to the Drakensberg Mountains in South Africa. And I loved it. I thought it was really interesting. But there was absolutely no way for me as a teenage girl in Johannesburg to pursue climbing. There were no commercial courses. There were no indoor climbing gyms. It wasn't a thing in any sense. I had to wait till I got to university at 18. And there was a rock climbing club at the university, and I was able to join that to get anywhere. I mean, I went to an all-girls school, a very good school, and sport mattered. But, oh, God, there were such conventional girls' sports, and I hated all of them. Hockey and netball and tennis, and I was terrible. I just can't coordinate with balls very well. And then lots of swimming, and I don't swim very well. And so I think nowadays there's a much wider range of sport open to girls, and it's the individual sports that I love. It's climbing and skiing and things like that, and that all feels to me more accessible. There are a lot more role models, so it's much easier to visualize yourself doing one of these sports. I mean, when I started rock climbing, then mountaineering, I mean, there were a handful of women in South Africa doing it. And we were so isolated in South Africa. This is, the tail end of apartheid South Africa under sanctions. So it was picking up a book. I don't know, I was about 20. And it's a book called Annapurna, A Woman's Place. It's the story of the first all-woman expedition to the Himalaya, American expedition led by Arlene Bloom. Well worth reading. Great book. And that was the first time that I actually thought, wow, Himalaya. I could possibly try and get to the Himalaya. And that was a big thing to have that thought, whereas now there's so much information available to women. And there's so many more women doing it. I mean, I did it in a time when women were beginning to do extreme sports. So it wasn't exclusionary the way it might have been a generation earlier. But you were still likely to be the only woman. And in some ways that was quite exciting. It made you special. And, that was a nice feeling. But on the other hand, it also made you very isolated and very much carrying the flag of all women. And if you failed to do anything, and God forbid you burst into tears halfway up the mountain, which I have done more than once, there you were representing the entire gender of woman, and you had just failed all 3.5 billion women on the planet. You're terrible. And I think that pressure's gone. I see lots of young women now, and they're not trying to get onto boys' expeditions, which is what I was trying to do. They're climbing with each other. They're making their own expeditions. They're putting together wonderful support groups on Facebook, supporting each other, sharing tips, sharing motivation. And that's lovely. It really is, sisters are doing it for themselves in all the extreme sports now. And that's a big shift.
Yes, I think you're right about that. I mean, the digital era has made an enormous difference, and social media, of course, is leading that in terms of giving these young women the opportunity, the accessibility, and so on. But I'm sure, as you mentioned, growing up in that apartheid era in South Africa, you faced your own challenges as well. Was there any opposition gender-wise and in terms of your nationality and the environment in which you were growing up? Was there any opposition to you participating in such an adventure sport, Cathy? Did you have to break any ceilings in that respect?
Well, the way I got onto my first Everest expedition was extraordinarily sexist. So, sort of. I don't think I faced a great deal of sexism personally in the various expeditions and climbing that I did up until then. I was incredibly lucky to have parents who didn't have any strange ideas about what girls can and cannot do, despite the fact I was the only daughter, by far the youngest child. And my eldest brother had been killed in a car crash, so they knew what it felt like to lose a child. My parents were incredibly supportive. There'd be a sort of slightly stunned silence when I came back with some scheme, and then it was like, okay, how can we help? But that first Everest expedition, so I'd been climbing things and I had this ambition for the Himalaya and I did not know how to make it happen. I couldn't visualize myself ever having the confidence or the experience to put a trip together myself or raise money or I felt at a loss. And then they put together the first South African Everest expedition. Male team leader invited some of the top names in South Africa, but South Africa, was a puddle in terms of mountaineering experience. So we're not talking about, world-class climbers here, but big names in the local market. And all male. And then they had a newspaper who was one of the sponsors. And the newspaper clearly decided that the whole project was vaguely interesting, but just not all that interesting. And that maybe they could think of a way to sex up the coverage a bit. So they decided to run a competition to find a woman to join the team. And they did literally present it as if the woman was going to be carried up the mountain and planted on the summit like a flag. One of the sort of advertisements, headlines that was run for this thing literally said, are you our girl? Are you our girl with the balls for the summit? And the women were going to have to apply and go on a selection expedition, and it was actually very early reality television. It was all in the name of drumming up more media coverage. And I was in my late 20s, at university doing a master's, all militant and feminist, and took one look at this and thought, this is sexist as hell. But if I don't apply, some other woman will go, and I'll never know if it could have been me.
There you go. Breaking down that glass ceiling, absolutely. So it's really interesting how you've overcome all of that, through this sort of period that you've been climbing, and you've emerged to be a leader and a thought leader, really, to make your voice in demand, as it were, with motivational speaking. What's your core message when you take that out? I'm sure you customize it to the audience in a way, but what's your core message when you go out to give these motivational talks around the world, Cathy?
I've always focused in on team dynamics. That's what interests me, and I also think it's the most useful takeaway from extreme sport into the corporate environment. Your individual achievement is impressive, but companies are essentially all about trying to get teams to work together effectively and efficiently. And at its heart, I think everybody looks at mountains and assumes that the big challenge is the physical climbing and the big obstacles are the drama things, killer storms, giant avalanches, that kind of thing. But the truth is that the technical climbing of the mountain is entry-level stuff. You have to be able to do it, but it's not enough to get you to the top. And the obstacles that are going to stop you are not storms and avalanches. You're honestly unlikely to see either. And even if you do, you can't stop them. All you can do is survive them. And what really matters is how you react to them and how you react next. So the thing that dictates your success or your failure is inside the team, inside the individuals, and then inside the dynamic within the group. Teams can self-destruct very effectively without anything else going wrong. And my first Everest expedition was horrendous. Massive personality conflict. 3 team members walked out in what was effectively a failed power play before we even got to base camp. So a hell of a learning curve. You'd think that adults, professionals who shared a passion and shared a goal would be able to do it. But it's not true. It's not enough. So when it comes to teams, we need to really understand the ways in which we self-sabotage the success of the team. And then also the ways in which we can increase our chance of success within the team by making it more functional, more effective. That's what interests me, and that's what interests my corporate clients.
It's fascinating. You mentioned that because you'd said earlier how you didn't care for those structured sports in your youth, of hockey or netball or whatever. You'd prefer to have an individual sport, and yet what you've been doing, obviously so successfully, is nurture that team spirit in a way that can be effective, maximize its performance, in what could be an individual sport, but how much you rely on the team component.
Yes, I think it is very interesting. In some ways, I think mountaineering teams are more like business than formal sports teams, because formal sports teams are so, well, from the outside, appear to be so carefully chosen, well supported. They've got the coaches and the psychologists, and they've got well-defined roles within the team. Frankly, mountaineering teams are a good deal more haphazard. People just come together because they have a kind of a shared vision, or they've got the same amount of time off from work, or they're a friend of a friend filling in a gap in a team and you need somebody. And it's a little bit like the slightly haphazard way that business teams can come together. As a leader, you just get stuck with certain people and given a target, and off you've got to go. You don't have the time to select the absolute perfect set of people and train them up and test them mentally. And it's a lot more rushed than that. And that does mean that you're having to deal with a group of people who, yes, there is a team goal, but no mountain requires everybody on the team to get to the top, to call it a success. You only need one person to get to the summit. So at all times, there's a certain tension between individual ambition and team goal. And the same with the risks involved. People's lives are on the line in some of our more extreme mountaineering challenges. It doesn't matter what the leader says. If you think the leader's an idiot and leading you into danger, you're not going to follow the orders. So you can't lead by straight authority. You have to lead by cooperation, by persuasion, through a collaborative effort. And that can be challenging.
And there is no place for egos, clearly, and you find that out. We hear of other team sports such as sailing, and the girls that are from Team SCA, those all-women crews, how you figure it out, the order of things, but there's no place for egos. You are very much a part of a team. I'm curious then with what experience you have in the sport and what you've drawn out now to help you with your, if you like, secondary, well, or on a par career of motivational speaking. If you were to state really what the biggest three things, let's go with that, Cathy, of what you've learnt from the sport, what has that taught you in everyday life?
Let me take a stab at the biggest three things. One of them has been that, in my opinion, it's a journey that's not about any one summit. One summit leads to the next, one opportunity opens up others. And a lot of these mountains have been failures in the sense that I haven't got to the top for one reason or another. But that's okay. I was out there. I was part of that project. I was on that mountainside. I lived that experience. So the most important thing has actually turned out to be collecting skills through these different expeditions. And some of those skills are practical, real, like how to do crevasse rescue or judge avalanche slopes or whatever it is. And a lot of them are mental and emotional, about how to work within teams while still, pursuing my own ambitions, about how to create projects, about how to exploit opportunities, about how to share stories. And by accumulating skills, that allows me to stand at the top of each mountain, look onto all those other possibilities, pick the next one, and continue with the journey. So I don't think of it as kind of achieving goals. I think of it as collecting skills that allow me to keep on extending the journey, hopefully almost indefinitely. So that's been important. And I take the same collecting skills idea into the things I do in business. So that can involve doing projects, even if I suspect the project won't ever come to the fruition that we would like, because it's a bit of a moonshot. by taking part, I will have gained skills and experience that are useful to me. They can go in the rucksack and carry them onto the next thing. Another important one has been about failure. Now, we do live in a world, and I operate to some extent in what I think of as the success industry, and it's all about winners never quit and all this nonsense. And, if you have a backup plan, then you're planning to fail. And, there are all sorts of ridiculous aphorisms. I think most of that's nonsense. If there's no possibility of failing, you aren't trying something terribly difficult. If you're trying something where you might fail, you should have exit strategies, because you need to know how to get yourself out, not have it just turn into an utter disaster. We never go onto a mountain without having thought out exit strategies from different places in the mountain and thought through the different sort of ways it might go wrong and what we would do. And I've backed off from mountains because it just didn't feel right, or it was too hard or too far, or the risks had become too high, or whatever it is. And I think knowing when to call it quits is incredibly important. Understanding that your immediate goal, in which my case might be getting to the top of a mountain, can get out of sync with your long-term goal, which in my case tends to be coming home alive. And the second one's more important. Giving up on any one mountain is worth it if it means I'm still around for the next mountain. But justifying giving up is hard. Being seen to fail is hard. And being comfortable with allowing yourself to fail and letting other people watch you fail, that's been a process. I've had to learn how to do that. But it's liberating to know quite deliberately that I am prepared to do that. It's okay.
And I would imagine there's also that component of feeling that you may have let your team down when in fact you haven't. If they have faith and confidence and trust in your leadership, there's another message to the wider world, isn't there, that you could take away from mountain climbing?
What you're trying to do is support each other to get the most you can out of the experience. And you can let teams down in two ways. You can give up too easily, but you can also take them into dangerous situations. And you don't want to be doing either. So the challenge is to be kind of true to the spirit of your expedition, to understand what you and your team were trying to achieve by being out there, and try and make that happen whether or not you actually get to the top of something. But that requires quite a high level of self-awareness about why are you doing this? What are you truly hoping to get out of this experience? So that ability to ask some hard questions, because we do things where we could potentially get killed. Not every day in the mountains like that. That would be too much. But nevertheless, we walk out into situations where we have to have thought very carefully, how much risk are we prepared to take, and why are we prepared to take even this level of risk? What is this about? And I think that kind of self-knowledge or self-interrogation is very useful, and not everybody does it. A lot of people, I think, pass through life just reacting to what happens around them without really thinking about the reason for their journey.
And finally, then, Cathy, I'm going to ask you what sort of advice you would give to young women who are listening to this, inspired by what you've said, about getting into the sport and taking on the challenges of financing it and the planning and all the rest of it. So many different points you made there. What would be your advice to them?
Well, this one is particularly interesting to me right now. One of my 2017 projects is actually to start up a sort of a website and information portal looking at what I'm thinking of as the business of adventure, which basically means how do you fund it? Because I do get more and more people coming to me through social media and presenting themselves as wanting to be an adventurer, a professional adventurer. And how do they do this? And if I ask, well, yes, but what exactly is it that you want to do? What is your sport? What is your challenge? What's your driving vision that you want to adventure into? And they don't have an answer for that. What they want is just what looks like the lifestyle. And I think that's the wrong way around. You can't get sponsors, give speeches, write books, without having a story, an achievement, a journey already. It's the journey that takes you to those later opportunities to then fund and refund an adventure life. And that very first journey has to be you. It has to be something that really grabs you deep in the pit of your stomach and that you put together on a shoestring with money you've saved up off a second job. And, you do it with 3 followers on Instagram and a mobile phone that takes some sort of slightly out of focus photos. And it doesn't matter because it's the journey that you're doing. Then you can start to think about ways of leveraging that journey and trying to capture a wider audience and trying to think of it from the point of view of a business. But I think the passion has to come first. The urge to do something, that has to be innate to you. And then you can start to think about how to exploit it. I don't think you can do it the other way around.
Great advice, Cathy, and I think vital for young women listening to this program, that there is a way to start, but there's the best way to start. I'm sure there are many options, but this is the best way to start. Cathy, we could continue this conversation endlessly, but I'm going to draw a line under it for now, and hopefully we can revisit you at any time, because you have obviously a font of wisdom there and advice for young women, that not just in your sport but across sports too. So I want to thank you very much indeed for taking the time to come on the programme, and hopefully we can circle back another time and catch up with you on your travels.
Thank you. I'd love to. You asked some really thought-provoking questions. I've enjoyed this.
Thank you so much, Cathy. Take care and be careful on the next mountain.
I will. I will be careful but full of joy at the same time.
I'm sure you will. Thank you so much, Cathy. And you can hear more adventures of women Amazons around the world on this podcast. Just go to wispsports.com, or you can download this from the iTunes podcast store. Just look for Wisp Sports Radio. There are more conversations from around the world of women's sports on our website at wispsports.com, and you can also join in the conversation via our social media channels. Just look for Wisp Sports. And if you'd like to drop us a line, we always love to hear from you. The address is info@wispsports.com if you have any comments, questions or suggestions. Until the next time, I'm Chris Stafford. Thank you for listening. Goodbye for now.